Welcome, you're watching World Talks and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. Wednesday was a big day for Kyiv as Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Ursula von der Leyen put pen to paper on €2 billion joint drone and missile production and safe drone storage in the EU territory. Is this going to get Ukraine closer to the end of the ongoing war? Now, this will be one of many questions for Dr. Tymofiy Mylovanov, president at the Kyiv School of Economics, who also served as former Ukrainian Minister of Economic Development. Hello and welcome to the show.
Hello.
So the deal between the EU and Ukraine, is it bad news for Putin?
Yeah, absolutely. Ukraine has already shown this summer and this spring that it can reach far and deep into Russia, and it can put pressure on Russian economy and also on logistics for the military operations of Russia. And now it's being scaled up with the EU support.
So this is the first EU-wide agreement of this kind when it comes to the support of Ukraine. How significant is it considering its scale compared to previous EU military support for Ukraine? And what changes around this deal compared to the others that is really going to make a difference?
So in the past, the EU has focused more on the macro-financial or economic assistance, and the military assistance was mostly bilateral with individual countries. Now it's a pivot, it's a signal. It's not just a military support or economic support, but it's also a political signal that EU now is going to support Ukraine as a bloc militarily at the top level, not at the country level. It is significant because just one of the beginning of many of the packages like that, and it shows commitment from the EU. And I think that's something is fundamental because Putin has been betting on fatigue of the EU, that eventually EU will give up on Ukraine, especially militarily, and that's not the case.
Do you think that this is a clear sign that the tables are finally turning and this is going to be somewhat reflected on the front lines as well?
Yeah, I think so, because, if you were to ask me, and I'm an optimist, if you were to ask me 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, would I imagine that Ukraine in this summer, in the fifth summer of the war, would be able to bomb Moscow and Omsk and Sochi and deplete refineries and production capabilities of Russia, with Russia basically not having much of capability to respond? I would say this is unlikely, but what we see is that in this year 5 of the war, Ukraine has been able to break through technologically with the financial support from the EU and the world, and that is putting real pressure on Putin, pun not intended.
So do you think that there's going to be a fear of some sort of retaliation or perhaps some sort of hybrid attacks, increased hybrid attacks when it comes to Russia and the European Union, following what you just said now?
What the data shows that there has been indeed an increase in intensity this year from Russian attacks, and it was actually in the winter, maybe 20-30% relative to the previous year, and the most intense months, in fact, were the winter months, January and February. So Russia is at the capacity right now in terms of increasing attacks. So I don't think that's a real concern.
Mm-hmm. So what impact do you think that this military partnership is going to have? Is there going to be more leverage and pressure put on the political front or perhaps the physical front line, or both?
I think both, but what Ukraine now has been able to do together with the partners is to create conditions in Russia which generate pressure on Putin, both economically and politically, and they bring very visibly bring the war back to ordinary Russians, so they can't ignore it anymore. Now, is this sufficient to soften the position of the president of Russia? Not yet. It's obvious in his statements that he is bent on achieving his originally stated objectives in 2022. So not much has changed in his position, diplomatic or bargaining position, but the pressure is being felt, and over time I believe, I'm convinced, based on the history of wars, that over time his position will be softened. Now, how long will it take? It could be months, but many analysts are thinking that chances of ceasefire in this fall is maybe 5–10%, whereas chances of the ceasefire in next summer are close to 70%.
How do you think that this new chapter in the EU-Ukrainian defense cooperation is going to change the way in which weapons and military equipment are produced on the continent?
I think we are all moving from this large doctrine, big systems, encompassing systems of weapons, into small doctrine weapons, where you have very agile drones, almost built on demand for a specific operation, both in terms of software and hardware. And I think Ukraine is leading the way in this, and this is the future of the warfare. And I think this cooperation will facilitate or amplify this process, which is already happening. Our Kyiv School of Economics Institute, which is a policy think tank, has identified over 157 joint ventures in military production already between European countries and Ukraine. And so this funding will help to move this forward.
Our correspondent Alex Kadier, who broke the news here on TVP World, he mentioned that the components which are going to be used as part of the contract, of the drone production contract, will come from China. Is there a way for the European Union to have them produced here, locally, instead of filling the pockets of the Chinese producers?
Well, it's not just the profits that go to China. It's more of a national security considerations, because you want to have supply chains which are present there in critical moments. So in plain language, you want, if you rely on China components, you want to make sure that when China changes its political position on any specific conflict, these components continue to flow, and you can't guarantee that. Furthermore, you want to make sure that you know that the software in these components is working, or hardware, exactly as it is designed or promised, and it's not malfunctioning or leaking information. So I think Europe and Ukraine have to build their own capabilities to produce these elements, and in fact some of it is happening. For example, in Ukraine, the company Sign Engineering has been focusing on production of electronics which are important for navigation in drones. And this company has been now considered to be a unicorn, or almost unicorn, with investments from all around the world.
Well, there is definitely a big pot of money. This deal involves 2 billion euros, but we know that the spendings within that scheme could go up to 18 billion euros. So there's definitely a field and something to work with. We've heard from Ursula von der Leyen yesterday in Kyiv. She mentioned that the Ukrainian battlefield experience is absolutely fundamental when it comes to this cooperation. So Ukraine has the know-how, Europe has the means to do it. Do you think that those capabilities that Ukraine has in terms of the new technologies will be a better case for NATO membership for the country?
Yeah, I think so, and I think NATO would be strengthened if Ukraine know-how, Ukraine knowledge and experience would become a formal, integrative part of NATO. But I also think that politically NATO is facing a threat, a friction, or sort of a chance of, actually a conflict between the United States, current administration, and NATO overall. So the commitment to NATO from the US is weaker than in the past. And the US position and some other countries' position is that Ukraine is not for now a part of NATO. So what insiders are saying, especially after the summit in Ankara, that that position is unlikely to change for now. So in that sense, yes, I think NATO would be stronger, and it is a smart move for NATO and for Ukraine to join forces. But unfortunately, the political landscape is making it very difficult.
Do you think that, following what you just said, Europe is becoming more independent, especially of the United States?
Oh, yes, absolutely. But the United States has critical intelligence capabilities, which Europe is building, has been building. But, we don't need even to talk about intelligence capabilities. Look at the importance of Elon Musk's Starlinks for operations. It's a civilian technology, basically, with an edge case being used for military. And it is critical, the fact that Elon Musk prohibited use of Starlinks on the territory of Russia this year has created an advantage, a very visible advantage for Ukrainian forces. So, Europe has to build and is building much more than just military capabilities. It is getting stronger, but it will take time.
And based on what we see, based on what we saw in Kyiv when it comes to signing of that deal between the EU and Ukraine, what do you think the response was of the U.S. administration?
Well, that's a delicate question. And lately, the U.S. administration has been friendly to Ukraine. And I think it is sort of softly welcoming, both because it is supportive of Ukraine and it is also showing that Europe is stepping up. But, the views in the United States are unpredictable, are volatile. No one can say what the view will be tomorrow.
We know that there's been a meeting of the leaders of the Balkan countries in Kyiv as well. How do you think that Western Balkans could actually, what role do you think they could play in supporting Ukraine as of now?
They are already playing a significant role, first in terms of direct support, in terms of providing infrastructure and some of it legal or business climate infrastructure to develop a defense tech in Ukraine. I know a lot of companies have established legal domicile or opened branches outside of Ukraine in some of the Baltic countries, in particular in Estonia. We also know that there's a lot of training going on because these countries have had experience of joining NATO, being after the collapse of the Soviet Union and having specific difficulties or challenges in integrating and changing the systems, which are not very different from those that Ukrainian military is facing. And then, of course, they have strong engineering schools and strong leadership schools, and some of them are extremely digitalized. So we copied a lot of ideas and approaches from them for our government digital approach and AI approach. So there are tons of many very specific venues of interaction.
Just before we go, one final question. Before we saw the meeting in Kyiv, we saw a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing in Paris. There's been an announcement of the new anti-ballistic missile coalition, and Poland was not among the members of that coalition. Do you think it is the tensions between Warsaw and Kyiv that are playing a significant part in Poland not being involved into that anti-ballistic coalition, or there is another reason, perhaps a more technical one?
So I do not know. I would like to think that it's a technical reason rather than political. I think it would be very silly and counterproductive from leadership, European, Ukrainian and Polish leadership to let these tensions that we are seeing escalate and move into the security domain. I think this is sort of very damaging. We all are facing the same threat, and that threat is more important than our own individual country bilateral issues, which I'm sure we will overcome. So I think we shouldn't let those issues, which we acknowledge they exist and need to work on, get in the way of the national security and security on the continent.
And we will end on that thought. Thank you so much for joining me. Dr. Tymofiy Mylovanov, president at the Kyiv School of Economics, was my guest on the program today. Thank you again. And so this would be all for now here on World Talks. Thank you for joining me. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska, but I hope to see you back here very soon, so don't go anywhere.